Opposite Gloves here, and this is another DSP basic video, and today we're going to talk about the fundamental frequency. So if I switch my Edison here, here's my voice, and the fundamental frequency is important to understand because you're going to see it everywhere, and it's just important to have a concept of what's going on, especially when you're reading things on how stuff works. You need to know what this thing is. So if I switch this to spectrum mode, you see we have my spectrum of my voice going up and down, and all these upper areas would be considered partials or harmonics. And this low tone, this original tone, this is the tone you would associate with the pitch that my voice is at. And you can see it's doing all sorts of things. It's shifting through pitches and all this stuff because our voices are crazy and our ability to understand speech is crazy. But this lowest tone would be considered the fundamental. So let's go back, and I'm going to show you the fundamental in a variety of ways just so that you can get an understanding of it. It's the tone that you essentially associate with the pitch that you are hearing. So if we take this and go to spectrogram mode as such, and we have our, our triangle wave, all these other tones, all these tones, these are all the harmonics. This lowest tone, which is also the strongest tone, is the fundamental. It is the tone you associate with the pitch of the note. So these are all the fundamentals. Okay, so let's show you it in one more case, and then that's pretty much it for the fundamental. I mean, not much more to say about that. All the tones above it are the partials and harmonics. So if we open up Harmer's pretty cool because it's got some options here. And if we open up the spectral view, we can see our fundamental down here. This first tone would be our fundamental. And if we were to engage sub, you can see our sub bass comes in. There's our fundamental. If this tone were not in line with the rest of the tones, we'd have some serious problems. So that's all that the fundamental is. If you have any questions, as you can see, we can reduce it to the fundamental. Then this tone would become the fundamental, whatever your lowest tone is, essentially. And if you think about it, in music theory, inversions are built so that the bass always determines the inversion that we're using. So if you have like a G major chord, I guess we're going to talk about music theory real fast. If you don't know about music theory, go watch my music theory tutorial series. It's on YouTube. Okay, so let's say we've got a C major chord. Because music theory is sort of the same rules sort of apply to it as sound design. So we have a C major chord. This would be called first inversion. It's made up of C, E, and G. Now, if we take our C and move it up an octave, this is called, no, my bad. This first one's called root position. Oh man, I could get slapped for that one. This one's called root position. And if you move it up an octave, this is now first inversion. So the same three notes, only now the lowest note is an E. And it sounds quite different. And if we change it again, this is called second inversion. So the same three notes, G, C, and E. But now our G is in the bass. So now this is the same chord, C, G, E. This is called far voicing, and our C is in the bass. So this would be considered root position. So that's inversions 101. But if we were to do something like this, right now E would be our fundamental in the chord, even though C is the root note of the chord. But if we put a C down in the bass, regardless of what's going on up here, it is now a root position chord because C is in the bass. You can do whatever the heck you want. And now remember, in chords, all these things are equal volume right now. In a sound, these would be proportionally quieter as we get higher up. So really interesting. And this bottom note determines what inversion we're in. So if we went to E on our bass, it sounds very different. Well, they all sound very different, but E is like the biggest difference is the rule. So whenever you're identifying inversions, you always go according to the bass, not to the upper harmonics. It's really interesting. So that is the second inversion because G is in the bass, which is the fifth. And it sounds really nice to resolve to the root inversion. And there's all sorts of like theories about how this stuff works and why it works the way it does. But just so you know, it sort of relates to the fundamental in a way, because the fundamental is, you know, what we associate with that sound, that timbre or pitch. Not necessarily timbre, but we'd associate timbre with the harmonics, which are these guys right here. And they actually follow an order. I guess I'm going to cover it real fast. So I believe the first one's an octave. Then this one's a fifth plus that octave. And then another octave from this original harmonic. This is a logarithmic scale right here. If we switched it to hertz, it'd be quite a bit different. And then it follows this series anyways. And this series, this rule, is called the overtone series, and it always forms a sine wave when you use every single one in the predictable way. Of course, you can move them around and detune them slightly, and you can move them just slightly, and you get all these weird in-between sounds, but the pleasant sound you're used to hearing is following this series, okay? But if we were to take every other one of those, we would get a square wave. So here we can do that. So we're on a saw wave, and as I hold down the note and switch it, you'll hear a square wave, and you'll see half of them disappear. Every other wave just went hasta la vista, man. And so that's what that is. And that's just basic stuff that you need to know when you're messing with stuff. And the reason a sine wave is so special is because it is just one frequency. So if we were to keyboard track this and turn our sub off, you know what? Let's just go to something that's a bit easier to work with for sine wave type stuff. Not that Harmonics isn't hard to work with. It's easier right now to do this. So if we have our sine wave, that is literally just one frequency, it's just one. And so that's why a sine wave is used for so many things, is because it's literally just one frequency. So it's really nice. There's no overtone series, there's just a fundamental. But as soon as you get to a triangle wave, you have a whole bunch of partials and harmonics, and it's no longer fundamental. But it allows you to create much nicer effects when you get into phase inverted stuff. See, there's our sine waves. And then there's our, well, this is a square pulse. And you notice it just changes the overtone content, just the spectrum content. So everything in all of these, it should be noted, are also sine waves. They're all sine waves at different frequencies, and they're being combined at different frequencies and velocities to create your sound that you would associate with stuff. So like a clarinet has its fundamental tone and then a different overtone series than, say, a trumpet. And I don't know, your favorite bass sound has it's just the overtone, the spectrum content. It's all that changes. And so the game is, when you're doing sound design, you can change essentially three things about sound. You have how loud it can be, you have how fast it oscillates, which would be its pitch, and you have its phase, where it starts in that pitch. So if we were to go to a waveform and look at our phase here for a second, you can see it starts at a particular phase. And if you were to change, so like a sine wave would go, let's go to a sine wave. And let me open up the controls to freeze this guy. So you see our sine wave oscillates at this rate. That's our pitch. So there's so many oscillations in a second, and that creates our pitch. Then you can control where it starts. So it starts right here, right? But what if we wanted it to start right here, or start right here, or start right here instead of right here? So we'd move it over a little bit. This is called phase, and you can control that. It's one of the three principal things you can control, and the last one is how loud it is, how when it reaches the peak, you know. So if it's like really loud and really soft. So by controlling these three things, you can control everything. So it's really mind-blowing when you break it down to that amount. But that is literally every sound ever is based on the principle of manipulating these three principal qualities. And like, for example, pad synthesizers make the amplitude change slowly over time, and as a result you get that. Flangers and chorus effects work on delay principles, and they introduce delayed feedback, which changes phase. And that becomes really interesting. And it also creates problems with amplitude, or not necessarily problems, but it does things with amplitude that changes things. And as a result, you're also changing spectral content. And then you also have pitch modulation, or just pitch movement. And that creates your chords. That's like what music theory is basically the study of, almost. Sort of. Not, I mean, like, you can't put it in a bubble like that, but that's one of the major focuses in music theory, is how these frequencies interact with one another. And sound design, sort of how the spectrum content interacts with one another. And yeah, so that's that. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. If you find this video useful, subscribe and share this video with someone you think would benefit from it. And have a blessed day.